Our presenters today are Rebecca Secula and Evin Morrison. Both of these ladies became part of our Extension Master Gardener program in 2021, and since then have delivered multiple educational programs on garden design and houseplants. As Master Gardener interns, they took on the updating of our resources on indoor houseplants as their intern project and did such a fabulous job on it that they ended up doing public education on the topic as well. Rebecca's gardening passions, in addition to houseplants, lie in vegetable production and sustainability, and her background includes a recent degree in sustainable food and farming from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where she studied organic vegetable production, organic pest management, sustainable homesteading practices, and more. Some of her favorite plants to grow are medicinals like toothache plant, as well as novelty vegetables such as giant cabbage varieties, and you will see pictures in this presentation of her garden. Evin grew up in Texas and had a love of cacti and succulents, and her frequent moves, she says, encouraged her to bring her garden inside so it could travel with her. And she has an enviable collection of not only houseplants, but a beautiful landscape outdoors. She admits that she has a bit of a jungle nowadays, but her redesign of her outdoor home landscape has been a work of love that I have been privileged to be able to see. And you will see some of this work today. Both of these presenters are truly experts on garden layout and design, and you're in for a treat today. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started with creating garden spaces you love. Very quickly after those introductions, we'll keep it short. I'm Evin. Like Kirsten said, I've been a Master Gardener since 2021. Most of my work with the Master Gardeners has been on houseplants, writing a monthly article for the website. But I do spend my free time creating gardens for my own home, and I'm excited to share my whole process with you.
Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca Secula, and I have also been a Master Gardener, as mentioned, since 2021 in the same class as Evin. And I spend most of my time in my Potager garden that's off the side of my house, growing herbs, flowers, fruits, and vegetables. And I'm really excited to be here with you today and show you how I choose the right plants for my garden. Today's presentation is given to you by the Master Gardeners of Northern Virginia. We're an organization of volunteers with Virginia Cooperative Extension that serves Arlington and Alexandria. And we have been here since 1985, working to promote public education on environmentally sound gardening practices through programs like help desk, plant clinic, classes, and demonstration gardens. So we encourage you to check out our website for even more great information after today's presentation. So today we are going to kick things off with design basics, specifically how to get started on your space. So since you've decided to join us today and design your own space, the first step for all of this is to survey the area. These checklist items on the screen include checking your sun exposure in the form of sun mapping, checking the soil type through testing, determining where and how you'll access water, and lastly, figuring out whether or not your design might need a new shape or if you can use what's already in place. I also want to mention that while you survey your area, you'll probably need to decide which checklist items are going to be your priority and which ones you'll need to work around. So for example, if you know you want to create a garden with a lot of sun-loving plants, you'll need to sun map the area first to see which place in your yard provides enough sun. And then you'll need to work around choosing which plants will thrive in that soil type, and then how you're going to actually water that area. However, if easy watering is your priority and you want to use the spigot off the side of your home, then you'll actually need to work around the sun exposure there and so on. But either way, this checklist is a really great place to start making your plans and deciding what's going to work best for you. So as mentioned, the first step in our survey checklist is to understand your sun exposure, specifically through sun mapping. Now, ideally, you'll want to get a sun map for a full 12 months so you can see exactly which areas of your yard get the most and the least amount of sun, as the position of the sun will actually change throughout the year. And it's also important as various structures in your yard will change your sun exposure as well. So for example, your meter-high fence, which doesn't interfere with your garden space in the summer, might actually throw out a shadow that's like 4 meters long in the late fall or winter, complicating what you can plant in the fall. So to get started on your sun map, one of the best times can actually be in the winter, as you can see where the shadows are the longest in your yard, but you can definitely start at any point during the year. And so to start your sun map, you can roughly sketch out your space on a piece of paper and then just mark the areas that are shaded in the morning, noon, and afternoon on the same day of each month, as well as marking where north is on your map. Additionally, you can take some photos of this space and put all of that into a Word document showing the movement of the shaded areas over the year. And then if you're doing the slow and steady version, you can also document really important elements like which direction the wind and rain is coming from, what plants are already struggling or thriving in this area over time, where water might collect in your yard as well. And then once all of this is complete, you'll have a really strong comprehensive reference sheet of the lighting conditions and other elements in your yard to follow. And then if you don't want to wait a full year, there is some technology that can be used instead. You can Google sun mapping apps that will use your phone's GPS and compass to help to determine your location's sun exposure, but this won't take into account any trees or other structures around your home. So for that, you can also use a shadow length calculator for different months to determine shadows from other sources like fences and trees. All right, and then along with sun mapping, gardeners will also need to know what's going on beneath the soil as well. And this is crucial, as without testing, you won't know the soil type you're dealing with, what kind of nutrients are readily available, what the pH levels are at, if there's any heavy metals present that might keep you from producing things like edibles, and even save you money by determining whether or not a space needs any additional fertilization. And all of this information will better equip you to choose the best ways to enhance your soil and what type of plants will grow best. The soil tests will often provide guidance as well of whatever fertilizer or amendments you might need, specifically depending on the plants that you're planning to grow. So for example, if you're wanting nothing more than to add another blueberry bush to your landscape, but find that your soil has a high pH, which is quite the opposite of what your blueberry bush needs, your soil test will help you to determine the best ways to amend it and create the right pH balance. And so to get started on your soil test, MGNV has soil test kits available at our various locations, and you can watch our how-to video on the website, which will walk you through each step, and then you'll go ahead and send them off to Virginia Tech for testing. And just so you know, fall is actually a really great time to complete your soil test, as it can help you get a head start on knowing which fertilizer or amendments you might need to apply in the spring, and then some of which can even be applied now in the fall to give you a good head start. And then the next important part of surveying your space is determining how you'll water. There are so many different ways to water your garden depending on your situation and what purpose your garden is serving. And watering your garden can be really low tech, such as a regular garden hose or setting out rain barrels with built-in spigots. Or it can even be more involved in high tech, such as creating a drip line system or a pre-positioned soaker hose on timers. And then if you really want to go for it, you can even install an entire irrigation system that's set up to Bluetooth. I actually have one of those systems that you can turn it on and off through your phone, and it even takes our local weather station data into account, and will turn off the watering if there's too much rain in the area. So whatever you pick, you just need to make sure that whatever you do is consistent and convenient, because without those two elements, you're not going to be as well set up for success as you want. And now to determine which of these systems you might actually want to use, you need to figure out where your nearest water source is to the garden you're creating. If you want a separate space way off the side of your house that no hose can reach, you'll need to pick a system that you can get water to easily, because you definitely aren't going to want to be carrying a bunch of water back and forth in our Virginia summers, despite your really best intentions to do just that. And then the simplest option here might just be rain barrels, but you should also consider alternatives for years like this, where we just aren't getting enough rain in the summer to collect for the full year. And then once you've thought through the how and where of your watering, then you can also determine whether or not you want to consider planting maybe a dry garden or even a rain or bog garden, given the conditions that you already have. For example, if you have a spot in your yard that's really dry, very well draining, you might just decide to plant only drought-tolerant plants, especially our drought-tolerant natives. Or maybe you have a space that's really wet or pools often in rainy weather, And in that case, creating a rain or bog garden is actually perfect, using natives that thrive in semi-aquatic or even wet conditions. But all of this is to say that when you're completing your survey and gathering all of your data, you'll be the most prepared to figure out how to create the space you want, or being flexible enough to working with the space that you already have.
All right, thanks, Becca. So now that we know the soil, sun, and watering needs of the area we want to plant, we want to take a bit to figure out the perspective and the shape of the garden. For round gardens like these, you need to look at the path and see if the path goes all the way around or if the path is just going to take like the 50% of the front. So we want to focus on having the tallest focal point in the middle of the garden and work down in height so nothing gets blocked. Additionally, in formal gardens, it's not uncommon to have border shrubs all the way around and then have the middle filled with some plants that are a little bit taller than those border shrubs. For a circle or a semicircle bed that only has a path around the front half, you can focus your tallest planting in the back and then step down in heights towards the path. This not only ensures that you can see all of your plantings, but it also helps ensure that all the plants are getting good light and airflow. Basically, you don't want your middle planting to be a 6-foot tall tree, underplanted with 6-inch ground cover, and then your next thing is a 3-foot native perennial. Not only will you never see that ground cover you took all that time to pick out, purchase, and plant, but it probably will get shaded out and end up not growing. From a design perspective, what you're doing is creating an eye line, which is just a visual indicator where your eye is supposed to go. This top-down scenario gives your eye a natural path to follow, sweeping from the tallest point all the way down to the pathway that you're standing on. As you can see by the tree and the shadow it casts, it's also a good idea to pay attention to what kind of shade you might accidentally create with tall trees or shrubs through sun mapping, like Becca just talked about. Those are often used as centerpiece plants, but a bushy canopy that shades one side of your flower bed off afternoon might actually mess with your full sun design. While the plants will probably all still grow because they're getting sun throughout the day and ambient light, you could end up with a very lopsided garden in terms of bloom production, which we also don't want. These are very similar examples as the round flower beds that we just looked at, but obviously they're rectangular. Here you could plant quite a few focal points in the middle section, playing with color, form, and texture, and then again, plant the rest of the beds in descending order towards the path on all sides. Of course, there is room here for creativity. By no means do you have to plant your garden to look like a staircase or like kids lined up for a school picture, tallest to shortest. And actually, I don't recommend that. You want the garden to still look natural. So to achieve this, you can mix and interplant the species that are dropping you down to the next level. And that way you intertwine a bit and blur those really harsh lines. For something with a brick wall behind it, like in this other example, you could actually use that vertical space for an espaliered tree or a climbing rose, maybe a native honeysuckle or a passion fruit vine. That way your tallest element is also mostly flat up against the wall, and it gives you some extra growing space while still creating that tall visual interest. For pathways, which I know a lot of us have to plant walking up to front doors and side doors, we're still thinking of planting from the front to the back. Basically, you want the furthest point away from you to be the tallest part of your garden. If you have a double pathway, then you can move the middle bed's focal point into the center. And while we have these harsh lines and 90-degree angles here, that's really just to indicate your zones, but think of it in drifts and groupings rather than in rows, like vegetable gardens might be arranged. You'll end up with a much more integrated look rather than stripes, unless you want to go for stripes, which we do have some examples of that coming later in the presentation. All of these examples demonstrate the same thing, though. It's just really good practice to have the perspective of your garden in mind before you start designing. You start the process knowing what kinds of plants you can work with based on water, soil, and sun needs. But then you can also start to mentally organize those down further based off of the height you want in the garden. Knowing that you don't want anything to grow over 3 feet tall will significantly narrow down the long list of plants available, and it truly makes the process a little less overwhelming. Of course, you could plant a whole garden using ground covers, but you would still want to think in groupings like the 8-inch plants and then the 4-inch plants, so that those shorter plants are still getting their spotlight moments. And again, always think of where your shadows are being cast. So up to this point, we have a good idea of the environment and perspective that we're going to work with. So this is the fun part. Let's start designing. You can find inspiration just about anywhere, whether it's a painting you saw in a museum, a garden you saw on a trip, a book you read, a random image you saw on the internet, or a Windows display you saw out shopping. It's so fun to use these unique experiences to pull ideas from, like texture and color, and then integrate those into your new garden space. Plus, then your garden isn't just a garden, it turns into a whole conversation. I challenge you to actually go through your camera roll after this presentation and look back at all the random things you've taken pictures of, and I can guarantee that something will spark an idea. Now, of course, going to local gardens is also a great way to get some inspo and see plants that will do well in our area. There's a list of Master Gardener demonstration gardens on our website that you can visit and gather some ideas in. But also just taking a walk through your neighborhood can spark an idea and show you plants that are actually going to grow well in our area. We have already naturally started to winnow down the possible plants that we can use, but let's keep narrowing that down to pick a color palette. Now, I know not everyone might be familiar with a color wheel, or maybe it's been a while since you saw one, but here's a super quick refresher. Complementary colors sit across from one another on the color wheel. These are colors that will always look good together. You could actually just pick these two and be done and have a garden that looks great. Then you have a monochromatic color scheme. These are differing shades of the same color, so lighter and darker versions. In the garden, this is most successfully done when you plant a lot of different textures and shapes of bloom. So the colors might all be similar or actually the same, but there's some differences that your eye can grab onto, which is important. Then you have color families. So in this example, you start with the primary color, red, blue, yellow, or a secondary color, orange, blue, and green, and then include the two tertiary colors located right next to it. Obviously, color wheels can get very expansive, so your color families can grow. You can also use every shade in that wedge to create really beautiful color schemes using all of the monochromatic colors within that color family. Then for an even wider range of colors, you can actually just split the wheel right down the middle into hot and cool colors. Hot gardens are very popular for those of you who love red and orange florals, and cool gardens are beautiful in lightly shaded areas. But as you'll see later in some examples we have coming up, there aren't a ton of truly blue flowers in nature, and they tend to skew purple. But with this, it can be fun to play with glaucous or blue tinted foliage and not focus so much on the blooms, but actually play with your foliage options as well. Of course, nature has unlimited colors, and we can branch further and further away from the 12 on that previous color wheel as the combinations and colors combine and mix. Maybe you already know what colors you want to use, but maybe you have no idea, and I totally understand that it can be hard to know which colors go with which if that's not a natural thing for you. So here are 3 tools that I've used for inspiration and to create fun color palettes. The website Coolers auto-generates color palettes that will always look good together. You can pick one color and see combinations that go well, or you can upload a photo and it will actually pull color palettes out of that picture, and then you can use those. This is a membership website. I think it's $3 a month, but that's for the really advanced tools. I've only ever used the free options, and it's been more than enough. Paint chips and color books are a really great tactile way to combine and play with different color options. You can lay them out on a table, find the right combination, but then you can also take them to the garden center with you and hold them up against plants to match colors if you're really interested in getting that specific shade of pink. Lastly, I really love this book the Royal Horticultural Society published. It's called The Gardener's Palette by Joe Thompson. It's a gorgeous coffee table book, but it also shows you garden combinations based on color themes and then gives you plant lists to create them. And I have a spread from the inside of this book in a later slide for you to see. So now that we've done our legwork to pinpoint all of our environmental aspects and we've picked a color palette, let's combine them to make our plant list. We want to include plants from each of these categories, perennials, because you can plant them once and enjoy them from year to year. Then we want to include native plants to support our local ecosystems. Adding a few edibles to your landscape can be a beautiful way to add variety to your space. And then annuals to mix things up, try new colors, and you can change them up from year to year so you don't get bored. So this is my current planting breakdown that I'm about to show you. It's the worst Venn diagram ever drawn, but it will make sense when I explain it. Of course, it changes based on the garden and your needs, but here is my initial outline. I like to try to hit about 70% perennials and 30% annuals, with a major focus on those being natives. I've also been really focused on edible landscaping. I've been trying to make a massive effort to add things into my yard that not only I can eat, but berries that the birds and critters can eat as well. So I like to add at least one edible variety into every new planting scheme. As I find plants that I want to include in the garden, I start adding them to my planting spreadsheet. We have a blank version of this that I think all of you should have already been emailed that you can print off and use in your own gardening endeavors. Obviously, we need the plant name and the scientific name for shopping purposes, the bloom color so you can make sure you're hitting all the aspects of your color palette and in what ratios you are hoping to meet. Then find the average height and spread. That data will be used in the next design step. Next, we want to find the bloom time, because in order to support pollinators and make sure you have visual interest in the garden all year round, you want something to be in bloom as much as possible. So it's ideal to have at least spring, summer, and fall represented in this category. Winter interest is also important, so finding an evergreen or winter berry producing plant can be important too. Then we have the plant type breakdown, so you can see at a glance if you're meeting your desired ratios from the Venn diagram. Then the last column is for your shopping purposes, whether you want to buy a plant, bulbs, bare root plants, or grow seeds. It will help you give you an overall cost concept. And so now let's put it all together. You don't have to be an artist to create a great plan. I know this is probably the scariest part for a lot of people. The most important thing, though, is to have good measurements of your space. That way, using the measurements from your plant guide, you can add plants to your design and know how many you need to fill in a space, and that'll help you build your shopping list. I'm about to show you a bunch of examples of garden designs. Keep in mind, you can get as nerdy or as creative as you like when it comes to creating your space, and you'll see what I mean as we go through these examples. But the most important thing to know is that no matter what perceived skill level with design you have, you can do this. These first example designs are ones that I made for my parents for a backyard remodel in Texas. So these plants are not native here. You can basically ignore that. I was able to create a plan showing the number and the placement of each plant. My dad called me when they were actually installing this garden and said my mom kept stopping him from digging any plant holes until she could go check the photo, which was funny, but shows that having a good planting plan ahead of time can make it much easier for install later. If you don't have any photo editing skills, you can also do this as a paper collage. Just print out a picture of your space, and then you can print out plants that you've seen on the internet that you like, or cut up gardening magazines, a little bit of tape and glue, and you're well on your way. I like this method because you can really see the plants in the space, see the color combinations, and see what you're going to get at the end. If you're okay with a less visual concept and just want to focus on plant spacing and color, then you can create a design more like this. The garden here on the left was my mom's Mother's Day present a few years ago. It shows types of plants, the colors that I wanted to pull from, talking about those glaucous leaf shades from earlier. The Russian sage and the sea holly both have that. And so again, it's important to keep foliage color in mind as much as bloom color. And it also shows how many my brother was supposed to go to the store and buy and plant, and where he should plant them. These on the left are a little more detailed, but they are planting maps that show what's planted in one of our demonstration gardens at the Fairlington Community Center. And you can actually print these out from the MGNB website for a closer look. But it's proof that a few circles or blobs are all you need to help visualize the design before you start to dig in the soil. Of course, you can also go crazy with a set of colored pencils or even just a pencil on some notebook paper. Up on the left, you can see a very blobby drawing with a lot of notes, and these are the end pages of a book called American Roots, which Becca loves. And then the bottom one is just one that I drew on a rainy afternoon last winter when it was too cold, but all I wanted to do was get in the garden. However you choose to do it, I just highly recommend that you make a draft, or maybe two, maybe three, to help get a plan in place before you start putting plants in the ground. Throughout this presentation, we'll show you quite a few other ways that I've designed gardens. The Potager garden that Becca will talk about shortly, I actually drew that in PowerPoint. I wasn't sure if that was an option, but I know how accessible that program is and most people know how to use it. So I wanted to beta test that for you and it totally worked. So we are going to take a quick break for any questions that have come up so far.
We don't really have too many questions, but there's one idea that I put into the chat box. I'm curious to hear your take on it. In nature, Do you believe that there's such a thing as worrying about color enough that you should worry about colors clashing with each other, the way we do with interior or with clothing colors?
For color, I think it's really a preference. It's the colors that you're drawn to that you want to look out in your yard. And I fully believe that if you love your yard and you love the way it looks, you're going to want to be out there more and enjoy it. But no, I mean, you can buy a pack of wildflower seeds that has every color in the rainbow and scatter them around. And it's going to look beautiful just because you have something healthy growing. So no, I don't think you have to worry about wearing a black belt with brown shoes in the garden. It's really a preference thing.
There's a question that just came up. What plants are good in shaded areas? Do you have any general guidelines for choosing plants for heavy shade?
So we do have two options coming up that are heavy shade gardens, so you'll get a lot of ideas there. But really, I would just look online. My yard is heavily shaded, so I rely a lot on ferns, hostas. There's some great like woodland natives, tiarella, and some spring ephemerals like Virginia bluebells that work really well too. But we do have some really good plant lists coming up for that, and there's a lot available online.
There's a last question here about moving hydrangeas.
There's always a risk of moving a mature plant. I think the biggest trick is to get most of the root ball. I know fall is a good time to actually move plants while they're dormant, and it's not going to stress them out as much with the really hot sun. Like I said, it's always a risk, but I'm pretty brutal in my yard moving stuff around. So I think if it's not in the right place for you, it's worth trying to move it.
Do you have a favorite plant placement app where you could upload an image of your yard and insert the plants into the picture?
I do know that those exist. Most of them you need to pay for, so I've never really ventured into that. I just use Photoshop for that same thing. I drop a picture and then, like that example of my parents' backyard, stack photos on top of it. There are some out there. I don't have a good recommendation. Okay, so we're going to get into our first actual real life example. We have the basics covered, and so let's look at an actual garden. This example is one that I've actually used all of the previous steps to create my rain garden in my front yard. Luckily, I took pictures of the whole process installing this garden a few years ago, so now I can walk you through the whole thing start to finish. The goal of this garden, and always have a goal in mind, it helps narrow things down a little bit, was to help with a very soggy spot in our yard. The rain from the roof line was eroding the center of the bed and creating a massive puddle that would take forever to dry up. So I decided it was time for a rain garden. Our secondary goal was to get gutters. We have since done that, but for a while we had to go this route. So I knew I wanted to focus on ferns and hostas for this shaded rain garden, and I had already planned on doing a rock bed stream down the middle, like a dry stream, that would kind of capture the roof drip line and help that erosion situation a little bit by when it drips, the water spreads out further than just collecting in one spot. And then, like a sign from the gardening gods, we got this mailer from Proven Winners with a riverbed rain garden design in it. And I knew the concept I had drawn out so many times would work. And having this image rather than my random drawings and chicken scratch gave my husband confidence in the project too. I was going to do it anyway, but it's always nice to have that extra approval. So this is our plan. This is an example where I got super technical and drew up a plan using a 1 foot to 1 inch ratio and measured out each plant and its estimated spread and drew them on using a compass. You'll see that I wanted this garden to be very full at full growth. I was hoping to absorb as much water as possible, but as you'll see in a second, it doesn't start out that way. Going back to the planting ratio that I mentioned a few slides ago, almost everything in this garden is a perennial. To my surprise, even one of the colocaceae has come back every year. It isn't the variety listed on the plan because I couldn't find that one locally, but that just shows that at some point you might have to make last minute changes at the store to your plan based on what you can buy. I include some native grasses, foam flower, Tiarella cordifolia, and some native ferns. And since then, a neighbor has shared some of her native heuchera with me that has been planted as well. I also have a lot of different versions of hosta and ferns, so we get those differing monochromatic shades of green and lots of texture. For the annuals, and because of the inspiration picture, I added in caladiums for pops of color, and I wouldn't have thought of that without seeing that image. It would have been a totally green garden. And that's how we ended up with this color palette that's now on the screen. The gray is the river stones that I used. So on June 4th, 2022, this is what the garden looked like. And I did this whole project in one day, minus the mulching, which I did the next morning. But for your weekend warriors, this one is for you. We had a line of liriope grass that had started to spread and a few dwarf nandina bushes, but that was all. So I started by digging up a bunch of the liriope and planting it along the edge of another walkway in our backyard. And I moved the dwarf nandinas to the back as well. Except for the weeds, everything got transplanted. Now, I believe both of these are actually considered to be invasive, so I wouldn't recommend buying them new, but I also don't have the heart to toss out a healthy plant. So to the backyard they went. Next, I raked up the mess and cleared the planting space, broke up some really compacted soil, and because it was so clay heavy and the soil was super, super dense, I added in some leaf compost. You can see in the image how thinned out that liriope really was. It actually gave us about 8 inches of planting space, but I had a measuring tape out there and I thinned it to match the measurement that I had allotted on my garden plan. So the next step after you've cleared the space is to add your hardscape. It's much easier to plant around your hardscape than it is to add it in afterwards. And this is your edging, which I did add behind the liriope as a visual indicator of where to weed it out in the future and to keep that nice clean line. This is also stones, irrigation drip line. If you want to add large rocks or large pieces of wood for that really natural look, do that now and then plant around them. Not only is it a little easier, but it will lead to the garden looking more natural. Like the plants grew up around those stones rather than someone just dropped a stone next to a plant. One of the biggest pieces of advice I have ever taken away from a gardening show has been Monty Don on Gardener's World saying to place your plants, walk away, and come back. While we were working off of a plan, it's always good to make sure that the real thing is looking like the flat drawing. And a huge part of this is to take the time, walk away, get a cup of tea, eat lunch, clear your mind, and come back with fresh eyes to see if you still like that placement you had planned on. Of course, purchasing all the plants would have been wildly expensive. This is the back of my car coming home from the plant store. So to save some money, I bought most of the hostas at a local plant sale or as bare root plants. I picked up a bag of bare root ferns, multiple bags of caladium bulbs. The foam flower was a bare root bundle from a local native seller online. I actually skipped adding the dwarf iris in the plan with the thought that I would add them the next year. I still haven't. And I scored all the rest of the hosta, the native grasses, and a few ferns on a clearance shelf at a big box store. So you can get together a whole garden on a budget. You just have to be a little creative and patient. But this is really where the planting plan comes in. If you're planting on a budget and have little faith in the process because you aren't getting that instant gratification of a larger plant right now, but you'll save a lot of money. You can also start things from seed. So thinking about your planting plans now is a great idea because you can plan your seed purchase this fall and buy seeds and pre-order your bare root plants before things start to sell out. Finally, start digging holes and planting. You can see in the photo in the video here that there are some plant tags in the ground, and those were all indicating where my caladium bulbs and bare root plants were. That way I could kind of see how things were progressing. Also at this point, the Tiarella foam flower hadn't yet arrived, so the plant tags would show me where not to dig and accidentally hit a bulb, and also give me an indicator of where they were supposed to be planted, according to the layout I had drawn up. It also ended up helping me in the fall because I was able to dig up all the caladium bulbs and store them over the winter with a tag that had the accurate varietal on it. So while technically an annual, I have been able to actually replant those. Lastly, we want to mulch. You've gone through all this trouble, so add a fresh layer of mulch to cover up the ugly drip line and give that really polished look. It's the icing on your cake. Also, please ignore that dirty window. I didn't realize how bad it was until I put this presentation together. My dogs had been standing there with the noses on the glass the whole time, and I was working on this garden, so they smudged it up a bit, but there's proof of her keeping guard. So here's 3 days in, we got some rain and I was able to see the drip line in action. It lined up perfectly and did exactly as I had hoped. Then about 7 weeks later, we had this. The caladiums had come up, the Tiarella was filling in, our hosta had bloomed, and everything was putting on a lot of really great growth. And here's what it looks like now. So after 2 years and patience on my part and growth on the plant's part, I do have that full lush garden that I had planned from the beginning. And I can honestly say that other than replanting caladiums each spring and some very mild cleanup in the fall, as things die back. I haven't done anything else to the space, and it's pretty and low maintenance. So turning it back over to Becca.
Thank you. All right, so moving on with some garden inspo, we can see a real life option of what Evin has used. And so this time I'm giving you an option for a petite potager. Now, our goal here is to create a formal garden with an emphasis on edibles, medicinal plants, but make it pretty. And so this is going to give you a romantic feel of a formal potager, but it also has a really great goal of getting rid of some of your lawn. So if you're like, what am I going to do with all of this grass? I have a ton of sun. One of the great options that you can pick is including a petite potager for your yard. Okay, so for the inspo, the history of the potager began in medieval France and is tied to the daily life of the monastery. And so the potager was where the monks would really create their vegetable garden and everything that went into soup. And then as time went on and the nobility really took hold of the utilitarian space, they created something that was both really functional and pleasurable. So in this section, we'll take like some whimsical inspiration from that to create a beautiful French potager in your yard. And my inspiration came from two places today. The left is actually my own potager garden in the upper left-hand corner, which includes a lot of elements of the formal potager, growing a blend of plants, as well as being a completely separate space from my home and landscaping. And then I actually decided to use images of one of the most famous French potagers, Chateau de Villandry in the Loire Valley, on the top right-hand side of your screen. Now, don't get too overwhelmed. We're not exactly going to give you a Villandry here, but like many formal potagers in France, we're getting inspiration from these really iconic geometric shapes that produce beautiful patterns and great visual excitement. So if you have a space that's really screaming to be turned into something beautiful and productive, then a potager might be a great option for you. And so in order to get this shape and these geometric walkways in your home, you can do what we talked about a little bit earlier in the presentation by actually defining the space and figuring out exactly what shape you want. And now, since this is supposed to be distinct from your home and landscaping, to create a brand new shape, one of the ways that you can do so is actually putting down cardboard and begin mapping that out and starting to kill grass and weeds that might be present. And to make these nice pathways, you can put wood mulch on top of that for an even more formal look throughout the season as well. And MGMV actually did this last year, actually helped out at our Potomac Overlook vegetable garden. And we used this exact method to create a really nice pathway around the perimeter of the garden. So just to show you that we're putting into practice what we're showing here. And then you don't necessarily need to completely overhaul your space with new mulch and landscaping if that's just not possible. You can use things like containers, either large raised beds or smaller ones that you can purchase to create a separate feel. And if you decide to create something on the smaller side, we would also recommend using the same colored containers and shapes to create a sense of cohesion and formality. And then if you just have a really small space, but you love this idea, at the end of this section, I'll also show you an option for a cute potager inspired container planted with a few veggies and herbs to transport you right to the French countryside. All right, and now on to the plants. Since Villandry was my inspirational starting point, I wanted to keep the idea of the geometric shapes and some color blocking. And we'll be using some herbs, flowers, vegetables, but you can create the space with whatever edibles you use the most. And I ensured that you can utilize the exact same spaces for more than one season and also keeping that formal theme. So for the first little block, I wanted to create one of purples for spring and early summer. And here I chose a flowering herb that I know I'll use, and that's culinary lavender. Specifically, culinary lavender will produce less oil than other varieties, leaving a sweeter, more palatable ingredient for cooking. But if you don't want to use cooking lavender or for mixology even, any type will work well here. And then for more interest in the spring, you can actually choose a purple snap pea variety, such as Magnolia snap peas, like I grew right here. You can see on the screen. And this will create a late spring harvest that will match your lavender blooms for that color blocking effect. And they're a really beautiful annual to grow. You can see the dusty purple pods that I've harvested. That the green is another variety, so don't worry, you'll always get purple from these. And then they can be eaten raw or cooked, and you'll also get the added bonus eating tendrils as well. And then since this is a potager meant for almost year-round use, once you are done with your snap peas for the spring, you can actually switch that over to another summer bean, like the Chinese red noodle bean, for continued use and production. And these are really gorgeous beans with reddish purple pods that grow extremely long, and they also thrive in our Nova summer heat. So you'll keep that color block as well. And then a lot of potagers also have a central focus in the middle of the garden, which can include a fountain or another flower bed. And here, for something easy, I'm just recommending something like perennial rosemary, which is going to provide that fluffy, romantic texture. And it also creates a lot of beautiful spring blooms that you can actually turn into rosemary salt. So another productive use for that plant. And then I usually leave my rosemary pretty much as is for our Virginia winters, and I haven't had an issue, but some people might. So if you do, you can either heavily mulch your plant and throw a burlap sack over it, or you can overwinter it in a shed or a garage with a window for some light. But if you really want to make sure that you're doing the most possible to keep your rosemary going, you can also use a variety like ARP, which is good for zone 6 to 10. And then for the final color blocked beds, I wanted to show you how you can bring in some interest both in spring and summer with patterns. And so for the spring, you can have fun with some red and green lettuces. The geometry is such a big focus in Belandry that you can replicate that on a really small scale, just with lettuces and creating the cool pattern that you're seeing on the screen right now with these different colored head lettuces. And especially if you have more than one bed, it's really striking. And then once you're done with your lettuces and your summertime gets going, you can switch this bed over to a yellow color block, and it'll be really great with functional and beautiful flowers like calendulas, as well as a yellow tomato variety like Sunrise Bumblebee. Calendula keeps with the medicinal history of the potager, but it also provides a lot of function here when grown in companion with tomatoes, as it will attract really great beneficials like lacewings, hoverflies, and ladybugs that will help protect your tomato plants. And then the tomatoes were chosen just as a quintessential summer vegetable, but something like a cherry variety, especially if you have a smaller amount of space, will possibly produce more fruit for you than big slicers that take up a lot of energy from the sun. And that can be important in smaller spaces like this. And then for the plan, as Evin mentioned, she actually created this in PowerPoint. So again, we're just showing you all of the different ways that you can help create a garden map. And so this is the recommended plan that we have for you. And you can see these geometric shapes and clean pathways with interest in the middle. And then I also wanted to point out that since we recommended snap peas, you might be thinking, well, where do I put that? That's a huge vining plant. And the answer is a trellis. You can see the middle picture right there is actually of like a cone-shaped trellis. Now you can buy one of these, or if you want to keep your budget low, you can just find the same size sticks in your yard, tie them with twine, and then hammer that into the ground, and boom, you have a trellis. And that's going to really create a lot of great interest, especially with those red noodle beans just dripping down the side. Moving on to the next mini potager, if you will, even more petite than the petite. We have a raised bed for you to consider in the fall if you're tight on space. And we'll use the thriller, filler, spiller principles here as well to create a really functional and eye-pleasing space. So first we'll choose our thriller, and that would recommend something like a purple kale or rainbow chard, really sturdy plants that grow quite tall in the back, and their colors will pop really nicely as well. And they're cut and come again, so they're very functional. And then you'll want to fill your beds with veggies and herbs, and these can include things like lettuces and things that might provide a lot of texture like fluffy dill and parsley or chives. And just think about what you cook in the fall and go from there. And then lastly, we'll choose our spiller. And if we want a fall potager specifically, you'll want to consider flowers like violas, which prefer cooler weather and will spill over the side of your container. They're also edible. So just a couple of options for you to consider, and I'll hand it back to Evin.
So this is another plan that I have for my own home, and we'll hopefully be building this in the next few weekends. I've been waiting for it to cool off and now dry out. But we have another low area in our terraced yard that is home to some hostas and a lot of weeds. Before we had gutters, which they are now there, thankfully, it just filled up with water and became a mini lake. And while I do want to add a water feature there, that wasn't what I was going for. But even now with everything, we still have a very muddy area, so I'd like to fix that. So what loves moisture and shade? Ferns. And I have an abundance of moisture and shade, so let's utilize them. In addition, my husband loves ferns, so I try to add them into the landscaping where I can so that I'm not the only one that's nerding out and excited about this. I went on a bit of a research bender and learned all about the Victorian fern craze. If you love garden history like I do, I highly recommend looking it up. It's pretty wild. So I decided on a fernery, which by definition is a specialized garden for the cultivation and display of a fern collection. From there, I visited quite a few botanic gardens looking for inspiration, and all these pictures are ones that I took on our travels. So we have some from the U.S. Botanic Gardens Fern Walk, Fairchild in Miami, San Francisco Botanic Garden, and the New York Botanic Garden. And there are a few aspects in each of these photos that I want to incorporate, like the way the ferns are planted in the fallen logs here, the way the moss and the small ferns are growing into the rock and have taken over this stone. And then there's a hint of a water feature here. So I would like to try to incorporate all of those. So obviously for this design, we need a lot of ferns. It's kind of the whole point. I'm going to start with our native ferns, and you can find a whole list of them on plantnovanatives.org. There are probably more varieties than you realize, so it's fun to look through them all. I narrowed it down for my initial plan by going to some of the local nurseries and seeing what was readily available. Because I want a bunch of variety in color for that monochromatic color scheme and in texture, this list is more of an outline than anything. There's a huge likelihood that I'll pick up a few extras here and there. I am a plant person after all, and tuck them in and also transplant from a few places in my yard. I'm viewing this kind of like a Victorian fern collection, so the more the merrier, and they will all be labeled. But for now, I ended up with wood ferns, cinnamon ferns because of their added visual interest with the cinnamon spike, Christmas ferns, lady ferns, and ostrich ferns. Now, the ostrich ferns are going to play a major role here because when you look at the height on the plant spreadsheet, they are much taller and grow more upright than the other varieties. So these are going to be used heavily as a backdrop. And I'm also keeping an eye out for a tree fern for the back corner, but they are not really hardy here, so it might be more work than it's worth. Then for my non-natives, I want to add in potted foxtail fern and hang a Boston fern from one of the branches of the Japanese maple that's already there. These will have to be overwintered in my greenhouse, but my mom has always had these on our patio growing up. So it's just kind of a nostalgic thing. And I feel strongly about incorporating plants that you have ties to. I'm also going to add in a few of these Japanese painted ferns, so they'll give a necessary color break for your eye. And also they're planted right across the pathway amongst a bunch of Christmas ferns. So it's going to give some continuity to that area of my yard. Now I had the goal to add some more floral variety to my whole yard, but for the most part, I'm in very dense shade. So I'm limited with what will actually grow well. I also don't want to stray too far from my monochromatic green plan. So I chose 3 plants that will bloom white. One will give height and structure and be interplanted with those ostrich ferns for a back wall. And the other 2 are sweet and dainty, but all are perennials, and the dwarf irises will make a great front border and support native pollinators early in the season. So now I wanted to quickly talk about that other column that we haven't mentioned. That's really kind of however you want to use it. But for me, I want to make sure we have winter interest in this garden. Otherwise, it's going to turn right back into a mud pit. So for over there, I've added SE for semi-evergreen, D is deciduous, OW is overwinter. These will help me track what will stay green all year and help me avoid a completely bare garden. I'm still looking for that truly evergreen. And here is the initial plan. This is another way that I've created planting plans. I took my iPad and stylus out and drew it all out in the Notes app, taking measurements first, and then I took a photo of the space and drew my plan directly on top of the image. For this garden, I want to include my love for upcycling and build some low terraces out of terracotta pipes. I picked those up for $1 a piece at a farm up in Maryland. This will give the space some visual interest rather than just being completely flat, and allow me to make a little spillway for a pond that I want to add, because there's nothing better than the sound of running water in your garden. I also plan to build a small fence around the AC unit to hide it, using a Japanese technique called shosugiban, where you char the wood as a way to waterproof it, but it also gives you that look of a dark wood stain. For planting, I want to keep dwarf irises and bleeding hearts near the edges of the space so they can be seen, and the bleeding heart bracts can drape over the edges. We'll plant the calla lilies and the ostrich ferns across the back, like I mentioned, for more height, and then fill in everything else with the collection of various ferns. I've also toyed with hanging a few of my mounted staghorn ferns on the back wall because they love our outdoor humidity in the summer. But again, those would also need to come indoors or into the greenhouse for winter.
So for this next design I created for you, I think it's really perfect for fall, and that is a witchy Gothic garden. And since inspiration can come from anywhere, I used some of my favorite books and movies when making these decisions. And then I also tried to visualize what type of space this could be used as. And I thought it would be great to spruce up a pathway to your home. And so some of the inspiration came from like Dracula. I watched Charmed growing up, so you can see the Halliwell Manor on the screen as well. And then I also thought of Victorian inspired places and imagery like vintage botanical renderings and some of my favorite plants and the beautiful plants you can see around cemeteries. So if you're scared already, don't be, because I'll walk you through it. And so for the plant, I chose 6 different plants that meet several requirements here, like that Venn diagram. So we have natives, perennials, edibles, and spooky. And they also provide interest through the spring, summer, and fall. And these varieties specifically were chosen for the color scheme, which is really important to get that kind of like witchy Gothic vibe that we're striving for. So I want to start off with the annuals, first being moonflower, but specifically Ipomoea alba, as there are different flowers with the common name of moonflower. Ipomoea alba is a great annual option for this kind of garden, as it's a long vining plant that is perfect for trellises, pergolas, or even training onto a structure. And these have these gorgeous, large, sweet scented blooms that actually only open at night, giving a really great nighttime Gothic vibe. And they're great to go from August to first frost, so for that fall interest. And then while it's not native to Virginia, it is native to certain parts of North America, and they are beneficial to pollinators like nighttime pollinators such as moths and even some hummingbirds. You can also work in moonflowers into a container if you want to train it onto a trellis where you don't have a lot of room for planting. And then the next 2 annuals are red coxcomb and dark purple opal basil. The coxcomb variety, specifically Celosia argentea variety cristata, which is quite a mouthful, is a perfect flower here, as it provides a great fuzzy texture in the garden and has almost like kind of this brain shape for the Gothic theme. And then choosing a blood red option, especially in mass groupings, will really have it pop, and it can function as a great way for cut flowers, especially in the fall for cool fall themed bouquets. And then to help the coxcomb pop a little bit more, we're using that dark purple basil to provide deep burgundy backdrop and also give you some edible landscaping through the summer. So full sun is really important for these plants, especially for purple basil, as the anthocyanin production, which increases the purple coloring, increases in intense sunlight. And without that lighting, the anthocyanin production will decrease and revert some of the plant back to green. But if you seed a lot of this and do plantings in between the coxcomb, you're going to have plenty of edible herbs for you throughout the summer and fall. And then we have 2 perennials, specifically moss phlox and the hillside black beauty baneberry. Phlox subulata, also known as moxfloss, does not quite match the subdued colors for this garden, but we're making our own rules, and it also reminds me of the Halliwell Manor. That's why I included it. And when you're figuring out what speaks to you, don't try and keep yourself in a little box. And so the phlox is a native powerhouse, and it's the first thing to pop against the color palette in the spring, and it provides the first spring pollinators with nutrients. It also spreads and naturalizes each year via stolons, creating really stunning displays that can spill over ledges, and it's also really functional for erosion control. And then when creating this kind of garden, shaping your space with dark leaf shrubs like Actaeus simplex Atropurpurea group is actually a really good idea here to help set the scene and provide that definition and shaping that space that we've been talking about throughout the presentation. Now, it's more commonly known as black cohosh, snake root, and baneberry or bugbane. And that specific variety is not native like Actaea racemosa, but the native varieties don't have the dark Gothic leaf color that we're going through. So that's why I chose this one. It's also great for a tree line as it can take partial shade. And then the last perennial I'm mentioning here is Queen of Night tulip. Adding in a bulb like a tulip can be a really smart decision in these plantings because they'll come up in around April, May for this variety, giving really great interest in the first part of the growing season. But because it's a bulb, you can interplant around it. So then when those bulbs are cut back, you can continue to fill in the space without hurting the bulbs. And then you can use those cut back stems into black tulip bouquets. And then I also provided just a couple of extra pictures here, some subdued annuals that you can consider, like black dahlias, dark colored straw flowers that have even more interesting texture, and even thinking outside of the box, like using some dripping dark eggplants for more opportunities to create edibles. And then for the plan, now that we've reviewed all of the recommendations, here's a mock-up that we created to see what these selections would actually look like to line your walkway. So you can see how the coxcomb is really popping against the more subdued colors and the drama that all of these mass plantings can create. And I also love the idea of creating an archway to grow your moonflower for a really big sense of drama. And you'll really bring your witchy Gothic house to life here for a perfect fall haunted house. And then the next garden that I created for you is a rainbow garden, which is completely the opposite of a Gothic garden that I recommended previously. And this one just explodes with color. And when I initially thought about this as an ethereal, ephemeral wildflower meadow installment, Evin and I considered how this would actually look really great as a terraced option on a hillside. So in our mock-ups, we do provide you with the inspiration for both of these plans. Now, when it actually came to the specific inspiration, the first actually came from a trend that I've been seeing online relating to rainbow-themed bookshelves. I'm a really avid reader and I follow a lot of reading influencers online. And some of them have recently been styling their collections not by series or genre, but actually by the color of the book cover and the spines. And it creates this beautiful dramatic effect for home decors. And I just thought that was a great inspiration for creating outdoor calming spaces with that iconic rainbow look. And then when I thought about the rainbow of colors I would need, my second inspiration actually came from our native plants. I decided that creating a design using those would meet the mission of MGNV, not just to promote the ecological and functional benefits, but also just show how beautiful they can be as well. So before we continue with the design, I want to review very briefly why natives are so important. Our ecosystem really isn't just relegated to our meadows and forests, which are constantly shrinking and shrieking for help, but also includes our yard as well. And so our native plants feed the insects and wildlife that have evolved and developed here for a millennia. So that means not all flowers like our showy double cultivars that we might plant or exotic plants from across the globe can support our hyper-local ecosystem. And just a small example of that is that Virginia's native bees are split into two groups, with 80% being generalists and 20% being specialists on how they feed. Some specialists can only use one specific plant during that plant-specific bloom time to sustain themselves. And if we don't have those exact plants in our area, we just simply won't have those bees. So in this rainbow garden design, we do recommend one such plant, which is the sole host of the monarch butterfly. And just making small additions and changes like this, even a little at a time, can produce very big rewards for our local ecosystem. There's so much information on this that we couldn't possibly fit it into one slide. So we recommend checking out the MGNV website for a lot more information on why natives, and also to look at the Plant Nova Natives website to help you find plants to add to your yard while you're designing your gardens. And I use this list to create this garden design here as well. And then while we're on the subject of native plants, I also want to mention that it is extremely important to know how to read a plant tag and understand if you're purchasing a native plant. It might have the exact same name as something local, hyperlocal and native, as well as something exotic. So would you be able to identify which honeysuckle at the garden center is our native Lonicera sempervirens from the invasive honeysuckle Lonicera japonica without looking at the tag? So this is just a very brief overview of how to search and look for these key pieces of information. And as you can see, the scientific name is first written in italics with both the genus name Viburnum, which should be capitalized, and the genus is typically a noun, and it has a gender, and it'll be followed by the specific species name, which should be in lowercase. This is the proper way to write a scientific name, and the species name is a specific epithet and is mostly an adjective, but can sometimes also be a noun. And the example here is Burnum nudum, with nudum meaning bare or nude. And then when looking at your tags, you might also see a word listed in a single quotation, which means a cultivar. And then the tag typically also will include a common name, but again, you can't rely on the common names. So go with the scientific. And then you might also see a trademark name. And then if there is a family name, it is the rank above genus and taxonomy. It's really easy to identify as all family names end in ACA. And then this tag specifically includes native range, which in my opinion is a little more rare to find. But here it means Pennsylvania, and more often than not, you'll find your tag includes a growing range for zones. Okay, and now onto the plants. So since we have so many plants in this design, I'm going to keep my descriptions for them really brief, but you can find more information on Plant Nova natives as mentioned. So starting with red, I'm recommending red bee balm, Monarda diadema. Red bee balm has a really striking color. It attracts a lot of pollinators like butterflies, bees, hummingbirds, and it can spread through seeds and rhizomatic roots, and it will colonize to create really big, beautiful patches of color. And to prolong the bloom time here, you can deadhead, but also make sure to leave some of these dried up flower heads on the plant so nature can really get as many benefits as possible from this. We have a lot of insects that will overwinter in dead plant stems, and we have birds that will eat dried up seed heads. So while you do want those blooms, keep in mind that this native garden really is for our nature. And then for our orange section, we technically have 2 flowers recommended here, one native, one annual, but with really good reason. The native we recommend here is milkweed, specifically Asclepias tuberosa, as this variety has orange blooms. And milkweed is that superstar plant, the cornerstone plant and specialist host that I talked about earlier for the monarch butterfly. This is the only plant used by monarch butterfly caterpillars, and it's directly tied to those monarch populations. So by planting this one plant in your yard, you're already helping support those populations. And you really want to give this entirely over to the bugs, so no control is necessary. For example, if you might see milkweed bugs. And then since milkweed is really given over to nature here, you might not have blooms all summer like I didn't. And so interplanting something like an orange flower, like an orange zinnia that you can see here on the screen is actually at my house. Both milkweed and zinnia can grow to around the same height, so interplanting them shouldn't be too much of a problem. And then zinnias, while they're not native, can still provide benefits to local pollinators. For example, this zinnia here is actually providing nectar to the adult monarch. So since I have the caterpillars supported in my yard, now I can actually also feed the adults. And then for yellow, black-eyed Susan, specifically Rudbeckia hirta, is used here. This perennial does create a great meadow feel with the flowers that we've already chosen, and it easily reseeds, so it comes back each year. And then their seed heads are loved by golden finches, chickadees, and a host plant to the larvae of this silvery checker spot butterfly. And an added bonus is that these flowers are great for erosion control. And so again, with that possible hillside application, we want different flowers that are great for erosion. And then for green, it's one of the only other places I didn't necessarily use in native, but I wanted to give you a little bit of edible landscaping. So something like rainbow chard here is great because they still grow fairly tall and they have these gorgeous multicolored stems that fit right in with the rainbow theme. And then the leaves are a solid green to help separate that space between color. And then for the last section of BIV, blue, indigo, and violet, I've chosen a few plants that should hopefully give you good lines of demarcation between colors. But it really is important to note, as we mentioned earlier, that true blue is rare in nature. So I chose flowers that are native and will go well in this planting and should have various hues. So for blue, I did choose blue vervain, Verbena hustata. And this has a really interesting shape, brings good texture, and the spikes are shaped like a candelabra and a very cool flower pattern. It's great for meadow plantings, and it attracts all sorts of pollinators and is the larval host of the common buckeye butterfly. And then for indigo, we're representing here by coneflower, which I'm sure you've seen many, many, many coneflowers all around Arlington and Alexandria. I know I have. And what you typically see is Echinacea purpurea. Now, if you can find it, Echinacea lavigata, that one is actually specifically native to Virginia, but it is harder to find as it's considered a threatened species. So Echinacea purpurea can still be considered here as it attracts pollinators, is not invasive, and the American goldfinch likes to snack on it. And then lastly, for violet, I've picked some aromatic asters. And this works really well in mass plantings as it has other great characteristics with being drought tolerant, again, providing that erosion control, and should be used for wildlife habitat restoration. And it'll spread via stolons, naturalizing in your yard with relative ease. And then since they're on the shorter side, they're best used at the bottom of the rainbow to create more distinct border. And I know that was a lot of plants, but I want to really give you kind of like an idea of why we've made certain decisions. And so here you can actually see the plans that we have for something like this. And so we have both the meadow inspired version and the color blocked version. Now we thought that, again, this would be really great along a hillside because there are just so many great hills and slanted front yards and side yards in Arlington and Alexandria. So this hopefully encourages you to add like this design to your yard or gives you some inspiration to overhaul your space with something that speaks to you. And the hillside here we're using is actually from Evin's front yard, just to show you what's possible. And that's it for me on the design side. So I'm kicking it back to Evin for our last one.
All right, guys, this is our last garden design, and I've named it the Artist Palette. So the goal here is to create an ethereal garden based off of an incredible sculpture that I saw in New York, and secondary to bring in some pollinators. So I saw these sculptures in the train station in New York. They are by a New York artist, Karen Margolis. They immediately sparked an idea for a billowy, flowery garden. It's a huge piece of work, being a quadriptych, but I really narrowed my focus down to this one section with my preferred color palette. So I kind of zoomed in because otherwise you could get lost in this sculpture. So taking those shapes from the sculpture and the color palette into mind, I immediately thought of hollyhocks, cosmos, poppies, flowers that have that billowy cup-shaped petal structure. I obviously still want to focus on perennials though, so hollyhocks are actually a biennial. So I want to plant those this year and next year so that I'll get blooms every year from the alternating plants. This is also a double variety, so it's not great for pollinators, so I'll make sure that everything else is. Then I wanted to add some more structure, something with size to create almost a back wall of my garden bed. So I picked a small growing hydrangea with pinky cream flowers. Then cosmos are technically an annual, but they reseed readily. So I can be hopeful that those will self-seed and come back with the plan to replace them next year if that doesn't happen. To start layering in the blue, I'll turn to blue perennial lupins. They grow upright, so they will be towers of color without totally blocking out what's behind them. It's important to take the shape of your plants into consideration as well as the height and spread. It's just important that you visualize how they'll lay together in the landscape as it is picking your colors. Two billowy plants in front of one another. The front one has a good chance of blocking out and distracting you from the one planted behind it. Then I wanted to add a cultivar of a native plant. Cultivars are plants that have been bred to meet specific goals like bloom color, double petals, and size. For me, and I believe this is very much up to the individual gardener, but I'm okay planting native cultivars when the adaptation that's been made to the plant is to make it smaller. I try to avoid ones where the color of the blossom has been changed because it makes it harder, if not impossible, for your pollinators to find them. For us on this planting scheme, a standard Joe pieweed can get up to 8 feet tall, which is way too tall for anywhere in my garden, not just this planting scheme. So the dwarf version can allow you to add it in, get the same blooms, but avoid that massive size. It's also important to check on cultivated hydrangea varieties like the one I have listed here. A lot of them can actually be sterile, so they won't produce any pollen. The one in this list produces both fertile and sterile blooms, is great as a fully fertile variety. We'll get the size we want, the color of flower, and it will still be able to support some pollinators. For the lemon mint, I will be planting this in a pot, as I recommend you do with any mint varieties because they will take over your entire garden. For our mid layers, we're going to use autumn sedum and butterfly blue scabiosa and tiarella. I have these planted in a bed in my front yard and they bloom at different times and loved by pollinators. This is the tiarella. And then I will fill in the gaps near the front with sedum tornatum stonecrop as my ground cover. Personally, I don't want to see a lot of dirt, and I love a ground cover that gives us more green leaves and flowers. And then I also am looking at adding Virginia bluebells as a spring ephemeral. They will bloom early and then completely die back. So it's not something that you can count on for a long bloom. And here is our plan. The top corner picture is actually a spread from that book, The Gardener's Palette, that I mentioned earlier. So you can see how they give you a color palette and a planting. They've also included a painting that inspired it, so it fit this plan perfectly. For this bed, I have a curved back. There are a lot of gardens that have this kidney bean shape to them. If you are creating a flower bed from scratch or have the opportunity to reshape them, I highly recommend adding some curves to it. This undulating pattern makes your planting look so much more natural, as very few things in nature actually grow in perfect 90-degree angles, maybe some geodes. Then a little trick that I love to implement is to add a large planter into the bed. This is done during that hardscape process we talked about earlier, but it's a way to give you height in a spot that maybe a plant won't naturally give you. You can pick a planter in the color scheme of your garden, or for an added touch, you can also make it a focal point like the example image on the left. For me, I have it planned to plant into the garden so that you'll really only see like hints of that flower pot. It'll only be slightly visible as things grow up around it. It's also a great plan if you want to plant an aggressive plant like lemon mint because it will be contained. The trick here is to set the planter on a paving stone or something solid and flat. That way the roots can't as easily escape out of the drainage hole in the bottom and invade into your soil. They actually hit a barrier. It's also going to help make your pot level. I have seen mint escape through a drainage hole and make it into the soil, so just keep an eye on it, but hopefully it helps a little bit. In this planting, the tiarella is going to kind of be an experiment. It's normally a shade plant while the rest of these are sun lovers, but my hope is that in the spring it will emerge early along with the Virginia bluebells and maybe some poppies or spring bulbs if I choose to winter sow a few. This garden has no evergreen interest, so with nothing but a thick layer of mulch in the winter, it's going to be kind of sad. But with this plan, I have an early blooming for pollinators and for me, while we still have that weaker spring sun. My hope is that by the time the stronger summer sun hits, the other plants will have grown up over the tiarella, protecting it from the harsher rays, while the other plants will have already died back. And with that, my last piece of advice when coming to your flower beds is to be bold and to just try it. Plants can and will surprise you, and not every experiment will work in your favor, but some will, and those can be your most beautiful triumphs. And that brings us to our last slide for some questions and also a list of all the books we mentioned. I know they're in the chat, but this way you can screen cap them in case you're interested in any of those.
The first question is for Evin. And in your rain garden, Evin, did you add any kind of drain system or fill part of the wet area with anything other than soil?
For that, because we have gutters, it's not filling up with water like it used to. We actually had that going to a different part of the yard and draining off. I will probably pick a grittier soil that helps drain it a little bit. And for all of the pipes, I'm going to fill those with pebbles and sand rather than soil so that they don't fill up with water. It'll actually drain through. But we don't have a catch basin or anything set up. We're hoping that with the gutter and the plants absorbing a lot of the water that we will cut down on the muddy issue.
And do either one of you have any issues with deer pressure on these plant choices?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question and a really good point because I know Arlington specifically has a great amount of deer pressure, and the county is doing a lot of audits currently on the deer and talking to community members. And so I think that it really just kind of depends on your yard, what you're willing to try. So, for example, I have friends who have really, like, I mean, really tall fences, like 6 to 8 feet, where it's very hard for deer to enter. So doing something that is totally native and would be like a great snack for a deer is actually a fantastic option there as well. I also like the hillside option because if you have something that's like on an incredibly busy street, like right out in front of my yard is like a 4-lane road, and our neighbors across the way have a lot of natives. They're not getting any deer pressure there necessarily. I have a lot of natives in my own yard, and I do have some deer pressure, but they're mostly after the hydrangeas for me specifically. So I think that there will be deer pressure no matter what, no matter if you have natives or exotics, just because we have so many in the area. And again, this is just something where if you're finding that you're having too much pressure, then you can switch it up. There's no rules here. And you can also try other defenses if you want. Like I've seen like deer off and some other possible options that you might want to invest in if this is something you're really committed to. But I would give it a year or two, see how it goes, and then just make adjustments from there.
Yeah, I think no matter what you plant, the deer, they'll try anything once, and someone told me that and I didn't believe them. But I actually put a pothos plant, a house plant out in the rain one day so it could get watered. And the deer came and actually completely stripped it. It was grown up about an 8-foot moss pole, and they ate every leaf off of it. And pothos are technically poisonous. So I don't know what happened. The pothos has grown back. So I think with any of these plantings, you have to expect they might get nibbled on a little bit. But I also have dogs, so I don't have too much deer pressure because the big dogs scare them away.
Yeah, my 8-pound dog isn't really helping.
Have to say, I loved your inclusion of Karen Margolis's artwork. That's very beautiful. Just in terms of everyday inspiration, I know that I take pictures of plant combinations. If I see something that's really cool together, that's a very good way to kind of walk around and look at things that work for you, that appeal to your eye. I just wondered if either one of you have any other kinds of like what I would call everyday learning opportunities or inspirational type of collection of ideas that you use.
I think one thing that Evan touched on really briefly, but I think is really important, is just going on walks through your neighborhood and seeing what's thriving. There's a lot of different plant ID apps as well. And so if you're walking by, a yard in your neighborhood and you're like, oh, wow, that's like really beautiful. That's thriving in that shade. I have a ton of shade. What is that? That can spark inspiration just from your neighbors. And then so you're finding out what kind of plant it is, you can look and see if you want to copy that or look for a native alternative that would work well, which we do a lot of on the website.
I truly believe that you can find inspiration just about anywhere. I love, and I put a picture of Anthropologie store windows, but store windows at the mall, and especially in the spring when they like bring out the florals, shopping at a fabric store, you can find some really incredible combinations on tapestry fabrics, upholstery fabrics, things like that. I'm a little weird though. I find inspiration everywhere. I can find a piece of driftwood and turn it into a wall hanging. My husband looks at me like I'm crazy because the way my brain works, I mentioned it earlier, but take a second to go back through travel photos or just your phone camera roll. We have this crazy app now that we have thousands and thousands of pictures that add up that we never look back at. So take a second to just scroll back 2 or 3 years, pick a section and see if you see something that sparks interest. And if you're not in the habit of taking pictures like that, go for a walk and maybe try it and see if you come back with a cool new idea.
I also want to mention one last thing. If you're not as like a visual thinker as I am, Evan is definitely very creative and, can really find things in anything, which I absolutely love and appreciate. My brain works in a bit of a different way. So sometimes my inspiration more comes from like functional things that I need or more like logistics. And that's my starting point. When I'm figuring out what I want to grow in my vegetable garden, I'm really starting from practical applications and more logical reasoning, I guess. And then you can follow that pathway and take the steps that we've outlined to help you enhance that into something that's really beautiful and really creative. So it's also to show that no matter how your brain works, you can follow the same steps. You just kind of re-engineer them in the way that's going to be the most beneficial to you.
Yeah, I think that's why it was so fun building this presentation together, because
Mhm.
you can see that there was a lot of the analysis and the data that goes into designing a garden, where a lot of the time you think maybe it's just the creative side, but you really have to pair both of those sides of your brain. And like Becca mentioned, that functional side, starting with the goal in mind, can be super helpful.
Well, there's some beautiful compliments in the chat box about your creativity and about the beautiful PowerPoint and photos and
Oh,
for the
thank you
ideas
guys.
that you gave today.
Thank you.
And so thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. So thank you all for attending today, and thank you, Evan and Rebecca, for your talents.